for young pianists. As you just heard before this presentation, I performed 6 piano works by different Iranian composers, and each of them shows a clear musical idea from Iranian musical traditions. These pieces gives the students a chance to hear different Iranian musical styles and to express them in a new way. Sorry, my slides are not working, so. I would like to begin with a short line from the Persian poet Rumi. Whoever is far from where he belongs longs forever for the moment of return. For me, this idea of connection to cultural roots is closely related to this project because it shows how music can carry a sense of belonging and identity even when we are far from home. This study explores piano pieces written by Iranian composers for beginner and intermediate pianists. It focuses on how elements of Persian musical traditions appear in these works. My interest in this topic is both personal and pedagogical. I began learning piano in Iran at the age of 12. Like many students, I mostly studied Western classical music, such as Bergmüller and other standard teaching works. But even at that time, I began to wonder whether similar pedagogical pieces existed from my own cultural background. Later, when I began teaching, this question became more important because repertoire plays a very important role in a student motivation and engagement. In Western piano repertoire, we often see collections written specifically for the young, like Album for the Young by Schumann or Tchaikovsky. This has always been an important part of piano teaching, and it made me want to find similar pieces by Iranian composers. However, during my early studies in Iran, I found very few piano pieces that was accessible to students and introduced younger students to these Iranian musical traditions. After moving to Canada, I noticed that knowledge of Iranian music is still limited in many Western musical environments. During my studies at the University of Toronto, I also had conversation with my piano teacher about my background, which encouraged me to explore this repertoire more seriously. This is what led me to revisit and expand my archive of Iranian piano works. My music journey with Iranian repertoire and the archive I created started in 2020, right after COVID-19. I had already been playing piano for many years, but this is when I began to focus on Iranian music. Because of the lockdown, I started searching for works by Iranian composers. I wanted to know what piano pieces had been written by them. So I began collecting these works. At first, it was just a small personal project, but over time, it grew into an archive of more than 100 Iranian composers. This includes composers both in Iran and in the diaspora. I also contacted many Iranian composers directly, and the responses were very positive. Through this process, I discovered something important. A large amount of piano music for young pianists exists, but much of it is scattered, unpublished, or difficult to access. Because of these, many teachers are not aware of it. So the issue is not the absence of the repertoire. So the issue is the gap between these works and their use in piano teaching. So from this, my main question became, how do Iranian composers incorporate elements of Iranian musical identity into original piano repertoire for beginner and intermediate students? And how can these works support a more culturally informed piano pedagogy? This question is also connected to a practical goal because I want to better understand how these works can be recognized, studied, and used in teaching. This main question is explored by 3 sub-questions. First one is, what pedagogical level do these works represent within the Royal Conservatory of Music or RCM system? The second one is, which musical elements reflect Iranian identity, such as rhythm, mode, instrumental imitation, and folk melody? And how do these elements remain accessible to younger students? To explore these questions, I analyzed 5 piano works by 4 composers, Rohani, Omran, Dehkhoda, and Tafreshipur. These include Persian Reng and Chahar Mezrab, In the Dark Forest, Esfahan, and A Little Leopard is Born. These pieces correspond to RCM levels 2 to 5. This means they are suitable for advanced beginner to early intermediate students. In this presentation, I will focus on 4 main musical elements that I use as analytical categories in this study: rhythm, modal structure or dastgah, instrumental imitation, and folk melody, and show how they appear in these piano works. Each of these categories shows a different way that Iranian musical identity can appear in these piano works. Rhythm focuses on traditional rhythmic forms. Modal structure focuses on the dastgah system. Instrumental imitation shows how piano writing reflects Persian instruments. And folk melody shows how traditional songs are transformed into piano works. Through this study, I show how Persian musical elements can be adapted into a Western piano framework while remaining pedagogically effective. I also aim to bring more attention to this repertoire and its role in piano education. Although these composers share the same cultural roots, each presents a different interpretation of Iranian musical identity. For example, some composers focus more on rhythm, some on modal writing, some on instrumental texture, and some on folk material. To understand these ideas more clearly, I will now briefly discuss the main scholarship for this study. First, I will talk about sources on Persian classical music. 3 sources were especially important for building the theoretical foundation for this project. The first is The Art of Persian Music by During, Safad, and Mir Abdulbaqi. This source provides a general foundation for Persian music, including rhythm, instrumental styles, and the dastgah system. The second source is the dastgah concept in Persian music by Hormoz Farhad. This was especially important for understanding the modal system, particularly the structure of dastgah. Farhad explains the structure of the dastgah system in a clear and systematic way. He also provides notation of the 12 Persian dastgah. This helped me identify modal features in the piano pieces I analyze. His book was also important because he explains that Persian classical music is very different from Western classical music in both structure and practice. It is mostly monophonic, improvised, and passed down by ear. He also shows that a dastgah is not just a scale, but a much larger modal system that includes melodic units, important pitch relationships, and a process that unfolds over time in performance. This was especially important for my project because it helped me understand that when Persian musical elements appear in piano music, they are usually transformed rather than directly preserved. The third source is the Introduction to the Dastgahs of Iranian Music by Mohammad Reza Fayyaz. This book focuses specifically on the dastgah system in Persian music and provides listening examples for each dastgah. It was especially useful for the modal section of my research because the recordings helped me hear how these modal structures function in Persian music and recognize similar patterns in the piano pieces I analyze. Together, these 3 sources provide a theoretical background for this project. They explain rhythmic traditions, modal structure, and key musical elements that appear in the selected repertoire. In addition to these general sources, I also looked at the studies on Iranian contemporary concert music. These are important because they show how composers combine Western classical writing with Persian classical and folk elements. Several researchers were especially useful here: Kiana Shafi'i, Ava Shadmani, Mehrdad Gholami, and Kimia Hesabi Amnieh. First, Kiana Shafi'i. Her research focuses mainly on advanced piano repertoire and on how Iranian composers express cultural identity within Western notation. She introduces analytical categories such as rhythm, modal structure, instrumental imitation, and folk influence, which I also use in this study. She also compares Iranian composers with Western composers like Bartók, who use folk material in their music as well. Second, Ava Shadmani. She focuses on violin repertoire and shows how Iranian folk traditions often transmitted orally and transformed into contemporary compositions. And third, Mehrdad Gholami. He works on flute repertoire and shows that Iranian musical identity is flexible and can appear in different ways through melody, texture, and modal references. And finally, Kimia Hesabi Amnieh. She focuses on viola repertoire and her work emphasizes documentation and cultural representation, with the goal of introducing Iranian music to a wider audience and highlighting its richness. When I looked at this scholarship more closely, I noticed an important gap. Most studies focus on advanced repertoire, often on non-piano instruments, and very little research examines beginner or intermediate piano works. This is an important gap that needs to be addressed, because early stages of learning shape a student's musical identity, technical development, and long-term motivation. At the same time, Iranian piano repertoire for younger students actually exists, but there is no clear bridge or channel that makes these works visible to piano teachers and students. So the issue is not the absence of the repertoire, but the lack of connection between these works and piano pedagogy. We can also see this gap in pedagogical systems, such as the RCM, where Iranian composers appear only from level 7. So the question becomes, how does my project respond to this gap? This study makes two main contributions. First, it documents and analyzes lesser-known piano works by Iranian composers. Second, it shows that this repertoire can be used effectively at beginner and early intermediate levels. One of the aims of this project is to increase the visibility of this repertoire and help make it more accessible to teachers and students. In this way, it supports a more culturally responsive approach to piano pedagogy, particularly in diverse learning environments such as Canada. To explore these ideas more closely, I will now explain the methodology of this study. To conduct this research, I first built a large archive of piano works by Iranian composers, as I mentioned earlier. This archive includes both published works and unpublished scores that I received directly from composers. From this archive, I selected 5 representative works for analysis. These pieces were written after 1950 and were chosen both for the level and for their different approaches to Iranian musical identity. They were chosen based on several criteria. First, they needed to match approximately RCM levels 2 to 5. This leveling was based on the Jane McRae's chart, from her book Pianist Guides to Standard Teaching and Performance Literature. In this well-known pedagogical book, she uses this chart to organize and level piano repertoire. I then adapted this system to RCM levels to place the pieces more clearly within early piano teaching. I use the RCM system here because it is one of the most widely used leveling systems in North America. And since this research is situated in Canada, it provides a practical and relevant framework. At the same time, I recognize that other countries use different leveling systems, but RCM helps make these pieces more understandable for teachers and students in this context. To determine the level, I considered several factors: hand position, rhythmic complexity, coordination between the hands, texture, and expressive demands. Another important point was the duration of the pieces. The pieces needed to be relatively short and practical for teaching. As a teacher, I found that short pieces or miniatures can still present a complete musical idea, so they are very suitable for this project. I also avoided pieces that only suggest an general Eastern sound. Instead, I selected works with clear connections to Iranian musical traditions. These include rhythmic, modal, and melodic elements. The selected works were analyzed using 4 categories: rhythm, modal structure, instrumental imitation, and folk melody. The goal of these analyses is not to give a full theoretical study of each piece. So I'm not analyzing every musical detail, but focusing on the elements that define the Iranian musical identity of each piece. To do this, I studied the scores closely and compared them with known characteristics of Persian music. This comparison helped confirm these connections. In this way, the study combines close reading of the scores with ideas from scholarship on Persian music. Like any research, this study also has some limitations. First, access to scores is uneven because many works by Iranian composers are still unpublished or shared privately. Second, the 5 pieces I analyzed represent only a small part of a much larger repertoire. So these pieces should be understood as representative examples, not a complete survey of the repertoire. Overall, this approach combines 3 things: score analysis, pedagogical thinking, and comparison with existing scholarship. Through this, the study explores how Iranian musical elements appear in piano repertoire for young students. It also shows that these elements can appear in different ways, through rhythm, modal structure, instrumental imitation, and folk melody. Now, to see how these ideas appear in practice, I will move to the analysis of the selected pieces and show how these musical elements are used in the repertoire. The first musical category in this project is rhythmic elements. In Persian classical music, rhythm can function in different ways. Some sections are non-metric and flexible, while others are strongly rhythmic and follow a regular meter. These types of pieces are fully composed and have a clear and stable rhythmic structure. Reng is one of these types of pieces. As you heard at the beginning of this presentation, one of the pieces I performed was Reng by Sophan Afzarian and used this rhythmic pattern in this piece. The piece I analyze here is Persian Reng by Mehran Rohani. It is approximately RCM level 3, so it is suitable for advanced beginner students. Reng is a lively dance-like piece. It often appears near the end of a dastgah performance, creating energy and a sense of closure. Reng is usually written in compound 6/8 meter. Its dotted rhythms and syncopations are key features of this style. It has a rhythmic pattern as is shown in the slide, and the second part of this pattern may be changed, and depending on the composer and the piece, you can see the different part in the second part of the rhythm. In traditional performance, ornaments such as trills and mordents are common, which can make the rhythm feel less clear. However, the basic rhythmic pattern remains one of the clearest features of this style. However, instead of using these embellishments, Rohani simplifies this texture in his piece Persian Reng. He presents the rhythm more clearly with very little ornamentation. This makes it easier for beginner students to recognize and understand this rhythmic pattern. Another important feature of Reng is rhythmic flexibility. Even though the rhythm is written clearly, the way we perform it can change slightly. This is similar to the French overture style in Baroque music. In that style, dotted rhythms are often performed as double dotted rhythms, rather than exactly as written. We have a similar idea in Reng. The dotted rhythm can be slightly extended, creating a more lively and expressive character. And here you can see both the notated version and the performed version of the Reng, showing the difference in practice for the Reng rhythm. Rohani adapts this character well for the piano. He keeps the style expressive but still accessible for students. The piece includes dotted rhythms and syncopations, which reinforce the dance character. From a performance perspective, students should focus on shaping these rhythms carefully. The piece also shows that in Reng rhythm, the notated version does not always show everything. For example, the dotted 8 notes can be played a bit longer and the 16 notes a bit shorter. This helps create a natural elasticity of the Reng rhythm, and students will learn this flexibility through playing the piece. One useful approach is to practice away from the piano. For example, students can clap the rhythm, repeat some short patterns, or try simple improvisation based on the rang rhythm. Articulation is also very important. A clear difference between a staccato and connected notes helps keep the texture light and flexible. It also prevents the sound from becoming too heavy. Now I will play a short excerpt from this piece, Persian Rang, and you can listen to the dotted rhythm and a slight flexibility in it. From a pedagogical point of view, this piece is more than just practicing compound meter. It also introduces students to one of the important rhythmic forms of Persian classical music. So students are not only learning the rhythm, but also experiencing a traditional Persian rhythmic style in a clear and accessible way. Now that we have seen how rhythm reflects Persian musical traditions, we can move to another important element. In the next section, I will focus on modal structures and show how Persian modes appear in these piano works. In Iranian classical music, we use a modal system called dastgah, which we can think of as similar to modes in Western music, such as Lydian or Dorian. But it works in a more flexible way. A dastgah is not just a scale, but a system that includes melodic direction, characteristic patterns, and short melodic units called gushe. So in Western music, a mode mostly tells us which notes to use, but in Persian music, a dastgah also tells us how the music moves and where it wants to go. So the identity of a mode is not only about the notes, but also about how those notes functions and move in the melody. In this presentation, I will use a few important terms, such as finalis, which is the main resting note, agaz, the starting note, and east, a secondary resting point. These terms helps us understand how the music moves and where it feels stable, even if it does not follow a traditional major or minor scale. Another important point is tuning. Persian music includes microtonal intervals that cannot be played exactly on the piano. This is because the piano uses equal temperament, which divides the octave into fixed half steps. Because of this system, we cannot produce the exact microtonal intervals that exist in Persian music. That is why instruments such as the violin or the human voice can perform these intervals more accurately, since they are not limited to fixed pitches. In Persian notation, we use signs such as koron, which is half flat, and sori, which is half sharp. But in piano writing, these pitches are usually approximated, so we translate them into closest sharp or flat. For example, E koron becomes E flat and F sori becomes F sharp. To identify a dastgah in a piece, we usually look for a recognizable gushe or a characteristic tetrachord. A tetrachord is a group of 4 notes that acts as a building block in Persian modes. This is similar to Western theory, where scales can be understood in smaller parts. However, this is not enough on its own. We also need to consider melodic shape, phrase direction, and emphasized notes. Modal identity is defined by recurring pitch patterns, a central tone called finalis, and how phrases return to that tone. The finalis is a note where the music feels at rest. Most phrases resolve there. In Western music, this is very similar to the tonic. However, there is a small difference. The melody does not always begin on the finalis. It may start from another note and return to the finalis at the end. So we can think of the finalis as the goal of the phrases, especially for endings. There are also other important tones in Persian modal thinking. One is the agaz, which is the usual starting point of the phrase, and another is the east, which can feel like a secondary resting point. We can also think about the shahed, which is the note that receives the most emphasis in the melody. Since Iranian music is based more on melodic movement rather than harmonic progression like in Western music, These notes are very important. By recognizing the finalis, agaz, and shahed, we can better understand how the music moves and how phrases are shaped. This also helps us perform the music more musically because we can phrase it more clearly and naturally. Now I will show how these ideas appear in real pieces. The first example is Esfahan by Farhad Dehkhoda. It is approximately RCM level 4. This is centered on note G, and most phrases in this piece resolve to G as well. So in this piece, G is not only the finalis, but also the most emphasized pitch, so it may be also understood as the shahed. The pitch collection is G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F sharp. So it is this one. As you heard, in Western terms, it is same as G harmonic minor. However, in Persian music, the mode is not only defined by the notes. It is also by how the melody moves and which notes are emphasized. In Bayat Esfahan, one of the 12 Persian dastgah, we can think of it as similar to a harmonic minor mode, but often starting from the dominant instead of the tonic. So in this piece, we hear G harmonic minor, but the melody often begins on D, which is the dominant. This note acts as the agaz, which is the usual starting point of the phrases in this whole piece. At the same time, G functions as both the finalis, the main resting note, and also the shahed, the most emphasized pitch in the melody. So even though the music may begin on note D, it consistently returns to G, which gives the piece its sense of stability and direction. So in this piece, instead of G harmonic minor, we start from D, so it is like this. In a simple way, as I said, it is like G harmonic minor, but starting from the dominant instead of the tonic. So D can be heard as agaz or starting point, and even though the notes are similar, the musical feeling is different because the emphasis and starting points are different and changes the direction of the melody and how the music moves, reflecting the structure of Bayat Esfahan. As you see in this slide, I show the agaz with yellow highlight and finalis with the green one. So you can see how the phrases start with D and ends with G, and mentioning them as agaz and finalis. In Persian music, Bayat Esfahan is often described as a branch of another Persian dastgah, which is Humayun. The common explanation is that if we start from the fourth note of Humayun, we get Esfahan. But this idea can be misleading. It is similar to saying that Phrygian is just Dorian starting from another note. As we discussed earlier, Persian modes are not defined only by the notes, but by how the music moves, where it rests, and which notes are emphasized. So it is better to understand Bayat Esfahan as its own independent mode. If we look at the traditional form of this mode, we can see a few important features. First, most of the melody stays within a certain range between the fourth below and the third above the finalis. In this piece, this means between D and B flat. We do hear this central range clearly in this piece, but the melody also goes beyond it, which shows that the composer is expanding the range rather than strictly following the traditional limits. Another important point is the role of the main notes. In the traditional model, the finalis is often also the shahed, and the agaz can either be finalis or the fourth below the finalis. In this piece, we clearly see this. G is the finalis and the main emphasized note, which is shahed, and D, which is the note fourth below finalis, acts as a starting point, which is agaz. Another difference is in the melodic movement. In the traditional form, the melody is mostly stepwise and diatonic. But here, we hear more chromatic notes, such as A flat, B natural, or F natural. So the composer goes beyond the basic modal structure. This is also a difference in tuning. In traditional Esfahan, we would expect a microtonal pitch like F sori, but on the piano, this cannot be played exactly. So we hear F sharp instead, which is closer to a Western sound. This reflects a more modern adaptation of the mode. So overall, this piece includes many key elements of Bayat Esfahan, such as the main notes, the range, and the general lyrical and melancholic character. But at the same time, the composer adapts the mode. The range is expanded, the melody is more chromatic, and the tuning is adjusted for the piano. So the piece gives us a feeling of Esfahan, but in a more modern and a slightly westernized way. As I play this piece by Deh Khoda, you can pay attention to three keynotes. As I mentioned, the finalis, the agaz, and the shahed. These three notes guide the structure and feeling of this piece, so you can listen for how G and D shape the melody and the overall mood. The second example is in the Dark Forest by Farida Omran. This piece is approximately RSM level 4. It shows a different approach to modality, and it combines elements from two Persian dastgahs, Bayat Esfahan and Chahargah, creating a flexible modal space rather than a single stable mode. In Persian music, tetrachords from different modes can be combined, and this piece is a good example of that. It is centered on note C, which acts as a main finalis. This comes from Chahargah, where C has a central role in the mode. At the same time, G functions as a secondary resting point or east. This reflects Bayat Esfahan, where G is the finalis, and creating the effect of two tonal centers. The pitch collection is C, D, E flat, F sharp, G, A flat, B. So if I play on the piano, it sounds like this. According to Farhat, Chahargah has a tetrachord of G, A flat, B, C, and Esfahan has a tetrachord of D, E flat, F sharp, G. When we combine these two tetrachords, they form the full pitch set. So C acts as a global finalis, while G acts more locally as a secondary resting point. This creates a sense of two centers similar to double tonality in Western music theory. If you look more closely at how Omran uses Chahargah, we can see some important adaptations. In the traditional model of Chahargah, the usual agaz is the third below the finalis, which would be A flat. However, in this piece, as you see, the composer often begins phrases on C, which is the finalis itself. So here, C functions not only as the finalis, but also as the starting point, which is agaz. Another important point is the role of tetrachords. In Chahargah, the tetrachord below the finalis is usually more prominent than the one above. In this piece, Omran emphasizes this stronger tetrachord using G, A flat, B, C, rather than focusing on an upper tetrachord, which would be less prominent. Even though the music moves between different modal areas, C still acts as a final point of rest, which is finalis, giving overall direction to the piece. At the same time, small pitch movements are very important here. For example, the motion between F sharp and G creates a sense of tension and release. This modal blending creates a sense of instability and uncertainty, which connects directly to the title of the piece. In this way, the music can be heard as representing an unclear or shadowed space, like walking in a dark forest. I will now play this piece in the Dark Forest by Omran, and you can listen to the shifting tonal centers and a sense of uncertainty. Another important feature is the use of augmented seconds, such as A flat to B and E flat to F sharp. And I highlighted that for you as well, so you can see it. These are typical of Persian modal sound. Also, leading tones like B natural and F sharp in this piece behave differently. Instead of resolving upward, they often move downward. From a pedagogical point of view, this is very valuable. Students experience augmented intervals, multiple tonal centers, and non-Western melodic motion. They also learn how different modal ideas can exist at the same time and how a small pitch changes can create color and tension in the music. So far, we have seen how Persian modal structures can be adapted into piano writing. Now I will move to the next category, which focuses on instrumental imitation. In Persian classical music, instruments play an important role in shaping instrumental style. Many composers bring gestures from traditional instruments in Western instruments such as the piano. The piece I analyze here is Chahar Mezrab by Mehran Rohani. It is approximately RSM level 5, so it is suitable for early intermediate students who are developing more control and coordination. The name Chahar Mezrab in Farsi means 4 strokes, may refer to a 4-note melodic pattern which is typical in this style. It is a traditional Persian instrumental style known for its fast tempo and a strong rhythmic energy. It is usually written for a solo performer and is often quite virtuosic. In many ways, it is similar to an instrumental etude. It is usually monothematic and the melody is often very short, sometimes just based on a simple scale pattern. The rhythm is usually built on a short, repeating pattern, which when played fast, creates a lot of excitement. At the same time, the rhythm is not completely rigid. It has a slight flexibility that adds to the energy. One important instrument in this style is the santur. The santur is a Persian string instrument played with 2 light wooden hammers. It produces a bright and percussive sound. In santur performance, we often hear a specific texture. A repeated pattern continues in the bright upper register while a melodic line moves underneath. Rohani brings this idea into the piano. In this piece, the upper register plays a repeated pattern and the lower register carries the melody. This creates a 2-layer texture similar to the santur. Now I will play a short excerpt from this piece, Chahar Mezrab, and you can listen to these 2 layers in the texture. Charmezra pieces use fast compound meters, and here the piece is written in 12/16 with a lively tempo. A key feature of this style is the combination of an ostinato pattern with a moving melodic line. From a performance perspective, on the santur, both hands are used for fast repeated strokes, so the melody is more hidden inside the texture. But on the piano, we have more control. We can bring out the melody more clearly in the left hand and keeping the repeated pattern lighter in the right hand. So the piano is not only imitating the santur, but also expanding its possibilities and shapes the texture more clearly and expressively. From a pedagogical perspective, this piece helps the students understand layered textures and how different musical roles interact. It develops coordination, control, and listening between voices, while introducing an important Persian instrumental style. After instrumental imitation, this last category focuses on folk melody as a source of musical material. Many Iranian composers use regional folk traditions as inspiration. This is not only common in Iranian music, but also in Western music, for example in composers such as Bartók. The piece I analyze here is A Little Leopard is Born by Amir Mahyar Tafreshipur. It is approximately RCM level 2. It is based on a traditional Gorgani lullaby from northern Iran. However, the composer does not present the melody directly. Instead, the melody is transformed. Its rhythm, texture, and expression are all reshaped. So the folk melody is still recognizable, but it becomes part of a new piano language. In traditional performance, Iranian lullabies are sung with flexible timing. The rhythm follows the text and the singer's interpretation. In this piano piece, the rhythm becomes more structured. For example, in a version of this lullaby, which you have just heard, the rhythm is more natural and speech-like. In Tafreshipur's version, we hear more triplet bass rhythms and more complex organization. I will now play A Little Leopard is Born by Tafreshipur, and you can listen to how this melody is transformed in this piano work. As you heard, this piece includes triplets, 2-against-3 coordination, tempo changes, and expressive markings such as ritardando and menomasso. The expressive range is also expanded. The dynamics go from pianissimo to forte, with sudden contrasts and occasional sforzando accents. These are not typical of simple lullabies, but shows the composer's reinterpretation. The texture is also more complex. Instead of a simple melody with an accompaniment in the left hand, both hands often move independently. This creates a richer musical texture. From a pedagogical point of view, this piece offers many learning opportunities. One useful strategy is to have students first sing the melody in solfege before playing it on the piano. This helps them understand the phrasing and internalize the musical shape. Through this process, students can connect more deeply with the expressive meaning of the music. Overall, it shows how the folk melody can become a piano work. Students develop skills such as voicing, coordination, and expression. At the same time, this piece creates a bridge between Iranian folk tradition and Western piano pedagogy. Being more than just an arrangement, it keeps cultural identity while expanding musical possibilities. Through these four categories, rhythm, modal structure, instrumental imitation, and folk melody, we can see different ways that Iranian musical elements appear in piano repertoire for young pianists. I have summarized all of these elements in the chart shown in this slide to give a clear overview of the pieces. In the rhythm category, we saw how Persian Rang by Mehran Rohani introduces a traditional dance rhythm in a clear and accessible way. In the modal category, pieces like Esfahan by Dehkhoda and In the Dark Forest by Omran show different approaches to Persian modes. In the instrumental imitation category, Chahar Mezrab by Rohani reflects the texture and energy of instruments like the santur. And in the folk melody category, A Little Leopard is Born by Tafreshipur transforms a traditional lullaby into a piano work. In this way, we see how these categories work together to bring Persian musical identity into piano pedagogy for young learners. This project aims to introduce this repertoire to a wider audience and encourage its use in teaching. By suggesting approximate RCM levels, it also shows how these works can be used in real pedagogical settings. For listeners who are not familiar with Iranian music, these works can serve as an introduction. For me, this project is not only academic, but it's also a way to share Iranian culture through music. At the same time, this study represents only a small part of a much larger musical world. There are many more composers and works that still need to be explored. I hope this project encourages more research, more performances, and more teaching of Iranian piano music. And I hope more pianists discover that these works are not only pedagogically effective, but also artistically and culturally meaningful. Because when we explore music from different traditions, we do not only learn new pieces, we discover new ways of hearing, understanding, and sharing music. Thank you.